Thank you, Brother Matthew. Good afternoon, brothers and sisters, friends and young people, and welcome back. Why didn't David deal with Amnon? It's one of the great questions that really comes from this account. Perhaps David saw that under the law, Amnon should have died for what he did, and yet God forgave David for his sin. Forgiveness was the greater principle. Yes, that's true. But repentance was missing with Amnon. He did not repent. And David doing nothing actually made matters worse. The inability for David to act after Amnon's grievous sin now sets in motion the events that are going to shake the very foundation of the kingdom. So our second session, then, we've entitled The Heart of the King, the Exiled Son Returns. Because in this session, what we want to look at is that despite all the wickedness and all the treachery that Absalom does, David is still drawn to this boy. He still loves this boy. And although Absalom has David's heart, he wants something more. He wants the people's heart. He wants the nation of Israel's heart. And I would like to suggest for your consideration, brothers and sisters and friends and young people, that Absalom only embarks on stealing the nation's heart away from David because his plan A did not work out exactly as he had hoped for. And like the shrewd politician that he was, Absalom watched and he waits for his opportunity. Well, let's pick up the record then in 2 Samuel chapter 13. You look down in verse 22, and we'll read from Rotherham's here, but 2 Samuel 13, verse 22. And Absalom spake not with Amnon, either bad or good, though Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced Tamar his sister. So Absalom demonstrates patience as he waits 2 full years for his revenge on his brother. So he's got a lot of patience, but in a negative way, because he uses it for revenge. And I think, brothers and sisters, that we're now going to see Absalom's plan A revealed. And it's even more devious than we might suggest. It's not just the death of his brother, Amnon, that he wants. I think he had something else in mind. Verse 23, and it came to pass after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep shearers in Baal Hatzor, which is beside Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. So Absalom begins by beseeching David to let all the king's sons join what appears to be a banquet to celebrate the shearing of sheep. So it must have been some festival that they would have had for the sheep shearing time. And he wants all David's sons to join him at his farm in Baal Hatzor. So we read in verse 24, and Absalom came to the king and said, Behold now, thy servant hath sheep shearers. Let the king, I beseech thee, and his servants go with thy servant. So you notice that he wants David to come, as well as the servants. Verse 25, and the king said to Absalom, No, my son, let us not all now go, lest we be chargeable. And that word chargeable means burdensome. Let us be a burden to thee. And he pressed him, but he would not go. David would not go, but he blessed him because he loves the boy. So David seems reluctant for all the boys to go to this festival at Absalom's farm. Maybe David suspected something wasn't right. Why would Absalom want all my sons to be there? Absalom then asks specifically in verse 26, he says, "Let my brother Amnon go." Well, David might have really wondered at that request. Perhaps David might even have thought that Absalom was over his hatred toward Amnon. After all, he called him my brother. But notice from the record, there's something more. Absalom, as we said, invited David to attend as well. Now take a look again at verses 24 and 25 and see the emphasis that happens here. And Absalom came to the king and said, "Behold, now thy servant has sheep shears. Let the king, I beseech thee, and his servants go with thy servant." And the king said to Absalom, "Nay, my son, let us not all go down, lest we be chargeable unto thee." And he pressed him, howbeit he would not go, but he blessed him. And so we have this idea of let the king, let us not all, we be chargeable. He, David, would not go. I wonder if it's possible that Absalom's plan A was that in one fell swoop, he would actually take out not only the king's sons, he would take out David himself. I wondered if Absalom's plan was really to kill David. Now, if you hold that thought, we're actually going to come back to that in one of our other classes, where I think we can actually see that Absalom was really interested in getting rid of one person, and that person was his father. Well, David does not want to attend this celebration. He thinks it's too risky. Maybe he remembered a similar sheep banquet that was held by a fool that went badly wrong years ago. Remember that one with Nabal? Well, Absalom really works on David. In verse 25 and verse 27, the word used is, it says he pressed him. And it's a very interesting word, that idea of pressed him. Back in Genesis 19 and verse 3, we remember the story where Lot urges the angels to seek shelter in his house for safety. And it says he pressed upon them greatly. And that's that Hebrew word patsar. It means to press or to push. But the word that's used here in verse 27 is even stronger. It's different. It's the word parats. It's related, but it's different. It's stronger. It means to break down. Jacinius says it means to break. In other words, he really worked on his father David to get him to let the boys come. He really pushed David. David seemed reluctant, but Absalom kept pushing and pushing until he almost broke David to agree to let the boys come. But David sticks with one decision. He's not going to go. David won't go. But he relents and lets the other boys go. But because David he was no match for the persuasion of Absalom. So verse 28, we read, "Now Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, Mark ye now when Amnon's heart is merry with wine." And that was another tactic that his father David had tried with Uriah. You remember that? When Uriah came back from the battle, he tried to make Uriah drink and get drunk, and Uriah wouldn't do that. That was something that David had done. And then he says, "And when I say unto you, smite Amnon," Absalom says to his servants, "then you kill him. Fear not, have not I commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant." Well, I think it gives us an insight into the type of leader that Absalom was. He's not going to get his hands dirty. He'll get his servants to do the dirty work. He'll get his servants to kill his brother Amnon. And so in verse 29, "And the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and every man gat him up on his mule, and they ran, they fled." So at the right time, when Amnon's heart was drunk, Absalom says to his servants, "Kill your brother, or kill my brother Amnon." And they did, and they killed him. And the boys got up, all the princes, and they can't believe what they've just witnessed. And everybody gets on their mule and they flee. One obstacle to the throne is removed. The firstborn, the heir to the throne, is killed. And David's sons now are in panic mode. What has just happened? What did we just witness? Well, while they're on their way back, as they're fleeing back to Jerusalem, news has already reached David. You know, you've heard the expression, bad news, travels fast sometimes. This news went like lightning. David already hears. But the problem is, like many rumors, parts are sometimes wrong. And so the news that reaches David is that Absalom has slain all David's sons. And you can imagine David being distraught by that news. All my boys have been killed by Absalom. But there's one individual that steps forward who seems to know more of what has really happened. And when you know who that is, it's Amnon's good buddy, the snake of a man, Jonadab. He knows more. This Jonadab is quite a character. So the subtle snake says, don't worry, David. They're not all dead. Only Amnon. Don't you feel better, David? Well, how did Jonadab know that? Well, here's a man that plays both sides of the field. He's so subtle that he doesn't even call Amnon David's son. Did you notice that? He didn't want to evoke any more emotions on the part of David. He just says, Amnon only is dead. In verse 32, and Jonadab, the son of Shimei, David's brother, answered and said, let not my lord suppose that they have slain all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon only is dead. For by the appointment, and if you look in your margin, it says mouth, Rotherham uses the word bidding of Absalom, this has been determined from the day he forced his sister Tamar. And who gave Amnon the advice to force his sister Tamar? It was this snake. It was this man Jonadab. He gave advice to Amnon, which eventually led to Amnon being killed by Absalom. This is the type of fellow he was. He plays both sides of the fence. Verse 33, now therefore, let my lord the king take the thing to heart, to think that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon only is dead. You think that would have made David feel any better? Well, fearing the worst for the murder of his brother, Absalom now flees to his grandfather. He heads to grandpa, and he goes up to King Talmai's house in Geshur, because my grandpa will keep me safe. So what started out as an evil act by Amnon towards his sister Tamar, coupled with the inability to take action for the punishment of the sin on the part of King David, now manifests itself in the murder of Amnon by Absalom. And like Amnon before him, Absalom has now taken up the sword and he's plunged it right into the heart of David's family. Absalom flees. Look at verse 34, verse 37, verse 38. 3 times it's recorded that Absalom fled. And do you know something that's interesting? Nobody's chasing him. David's not even chasing him. And he's just up and he runs. And there's a wonderful proverb that describes that type of situation, that scenario exactly. And that's in Proverbs 28 and verse 1. The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. In fact, David longed for his son. He's not going to see Absalom, whom he loves, for 5 more years. Well, Absalom, he finds safe refuge with his grandfather in the land of Geshur. Absalom finds a place, no doubt, made up of kindred spirits who would love to see the overthrow of David's kingdom. And I think plan B now starts to formulate in his mind. And while Absalom spends 3 years in self-imposed exile, let's summarize what we've learned so far about the character of this man. We see Absalom's character begin to emerge in 2 Samuel chapter 13. The first thing we realize is that this man is indifferent. He lacks empathy. As we saw, the first time he ever spoke, he demonstrated a lack of feeling towards others. He shows no sensitivity for Tamar's feelings after the rape by Amnon. We saw that in 2 Samuel 13, verse 20. And he shows no thought about David's feelings toward Amnon. He's going to kill his brother, and he doesn't matter how his father or Ahinoam, Amnon's mother, feels. He has no thought for anybody else. The other thing we learn about this man is he's very deceptive. He's a cunning man. He never reveals his true intentions. He keeps them very close to the vest in case anyone catches on to what he's doing. He's a man with hidden agendas. He's an opportunist. He's patient, as we said, in a negative way. Patience is good, not the type of patience that Absalom has. Absalom has patience for evil. And he waits for the right time to move, to set the trap, to kill his brother. He is driven by hatred and vengeance. And he's a manipulator. He uses other people to accomplish his purposes. He convinced his servants that they were courageous and valiant to slay Amnon at his command, and they believed him. He even convinces his father David to allow the king's sons to attend the sheep shearing festival that he puts on. And he's a determined man. Absalom had been planning the death of Amnon for 2 years, and nothing was going to get into the way of that being accomplished. But really, in the end, brothers and sisters, he's really a coward. He got others to do the dirty work, and then he gets up and he flees when there's a sign of trouble. And away he goes, and he runs to Geshur. Yet, despite all these characteristics of this man, David loved this boy. In 2 Samuel 13, in verse 39, I'll read from Rotherham's here. And the spirit of the king pined to go forth unto Absalom, for he had consoled himself over Amnon in that he was dead. So there's that expression, he pined for his boy. That's how much he loved that man. But there's someone else that notices that David is heartbroken over not being able to see Absalom. That David seems helpless to even figure out, how do I even go about reconciling with Absalom? Perhaps David realized reconciliation with Absalom was wrong. Absalom had not shown any remorse. Absalom should, by law, have been put to death for the premeditated murder of his brother. Nothing had changed, despite Absalom being in self-imposed exile. And so in 2 Samuel 14 verse 1, the other person that watches this and sees that David is not himself anymore because he pines for Absalom. He wants Absalom back. And that's Joab. And so we see in 2 Samuel 14 and verse 1, now Joab the son of Zeruiah perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. Now we know that Joab, of course, that was David's sister's son. He's the mighty general of Israel's army. And he wants to see David focused. No doubt because he could see that there's other things in the kingdom that they had to get on with. They had to work on the military. They had to work on their economy. There was lots of things that needed to be done. They needed to shore up their defenses. The general workings of the kingdom, and David is unfocused. He's constantly pining for his son that's in exile in Geshur. And Joab was quite a man. He had a couple of priorities in life. His first priority, he did want the best for the kingdom, for the nation of Israel. Today, we would refer to Job as what's called a nationalist. That would be the expression we use today. He would be a nationalist. The nation came first for Job, then the kingdom. He held the throne in great esteem. The throne had to endure in the line of Judah. That was important for Joab. And somewhere tied for third place was God and maybe Job himself. But Job senses David's mind is elsewhere. And that's not good. That's not good for Israel, and it's certainly not good news for the throne. Job is also worried about succession to the throne. What happens if David dies? There might be a contest for the throne. And we're told in 2 Samuel 14 that it is actually Joab who wants his neighbor Absalom back. Their farms were actually joined together. So Joab's farm and Absalom's farm were actually side by side. And Joab wants Absalom back so that the king will get focused on the business that needs to be done. And so Job sees himself in the role of a mediator. He's going to concoct an elaborate scheme for a well-choreographed play, and he's going to enlist a lead actor, a wise woman from Tekoa. Now, I know Uncle Joe, he does great plays because I've seen them before. So Uncle Joe is going to appreciate this. Joab is going to organize a play, and he's going to get a lead actor, or an actress in this case, and she's going to be a wise woman from Tekoa. And who better than a wise woman from the tribe of Judah to get David to reconcile with his son? She is to come before David with an elaborate story that Job is going to dictate to her. He's going to tell her this story. And through the telling of this story, Job hopes David is going to recognize that it is really a story about David and his relationship with Absalom. If the plan works, then perhaps he can get David to allow Absalom to come back to Jerusalem. And it's in a very important play because the stakes are very high. Job needs to get Absalom back out of banishment and his crimes pardoned. Now that's a lot of things he's got to get done. He's got to get David to say, okay, I forgive my boy. He can come back out of banishment out of Geshur, and he can come back to Jerusalem. That's huge. So this play has got to be very good. This actress has to be very good at her role. So to play the part, Job gets this woman dressed up to appear as a widow before King David. Now she's to present the case that she's got two sons that had a falling out. She's to tell David that her boys fought together in a field, and one hit his brother and he died as a result of the blow. And she has to be very good at her part because she has to get David to see himself in the characters that she's going to describe. And then that he's got to make a judgment that's going to lock David in to following his own decision. It's a brilliant plan, really. Since we've, as people, have a very hard time looking honestly at our own lives, sometimes we can see ourselves better through the example of other people's lives. That's why the parables of the Lord are so powerful, because we are not very good at judging ourselves. We're actually pretty bad. So sometimes when we read the parables, we might realize, oh, wait a minute, that applies to me. And so that's why Jesus uses parables like that, because sometimes it's easier for us to see in a story ourselves than if he told us the story directly about ourselves. And so this woman has got to do this with David. She's got to get David to see in this story that he's in this story. And David, you got to get your son back. So perhaps this story is going to accomplish this result. In fact, the woman is such a wonderful actress, and the script is so convincing that, as we'll see, David doesn't even think it's a play. He thinks it's real life. David really thinks this is true. So Job instructs her to tell David in 2 Samuel 14 and verse 7. Let's pick it up there. 2 Samuel 14, verse 7. And behold, the whole family is risen against thine handmaid. So these two boys had a fight in the field. The one boy picked up a stone and killed his brother. And the whole family is risen up against thine handmaid. This is the lady that's telling the story. And they said, deliver him that smote his brother, that we may kill him for the life of his brother whom he slew, and we will destroy the heir also. And so they shall quench my coal which is left, and shall not leave to my husband neither name nor remainder upon the earth. Oh, she's very good. Did you notice what she did? She slowly changes the circumstances. She wants to have David feel sorry for her son that did the killing. She wants David to feel empathy towards him. Even though he was worthy of death, or at the very least he should have fled to a city of refuge for the killing, she wants David to see this son in a different light. He's her only son. He's her heir. Wow. Think what meaning that would have to a king when he heard the word heir. I think here too we see the thinking of Job. He viewed Absalom as heir to the throne. Her story also further changes the narrative. Did you notice that? So that her boy is the only heir she has. Well, in David's case, that's not accurate. He's got all kinds of other sons that could be heirs to the throne. The next thing she does is she changes the motive. For her son, it wasn't premeditated. It was not out of hatred. It just happened suddenly. It might have been in self-defense. None of that is directly equivalent to what Absalom did. Absalom killed Amnon in front of a whole bunch of witnesses. And then she changed the location. Did you notice that? Her boy was killed in a field. Absalom killed his brother in a banquet hall in front of a whole bunch of people. Well, you can see David pondering the case. He's thinking about the case that the woman's brought before him. He's got to make a decision. So he wants time to consider. This is quite a story. There's a lot of things involved. David wants to think about it. But it's not going exactly as Job or the woman has planned. Verse 8. David says, I'll give you the charge concerning thee. Well, first of all, the woman doesn't want to give David time to think about it. She pushes for a decision, because usually when people are pushed for a very fast decision, they don't make good decisions. So she rushes this decision. She wants it to be quick. When David gives her a promise that no one's going to hurt her, well, she's not there yet. She needs David to make a decision about her son, not her. So she's got some work to do. So verse 9 says, David says again to her, if anyone tries to do her harm, they will answer to David, and he shall not touch thee anymore. She's still not there yet. So she has to push her case again. Verse 11, then said she, I pray thee, let the king remember the Lord thy God, that thou wouldst not suffer the revengers of blood to destroy any more, lest they destroy my son. He said, as the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of thy son fall to the earth. At last, the woman hears the words that this elaborate play was supposed to get from David. Your son will not be put to death. So David has even invoked God's name. It's clear. In fact, if you look at the RSV says this. I'll just read this verse for us from the Revised Standard Version. Then she said, pray, let the king invoke the Lord your God, that the avenger of blood slay no more, and my son be not destroyed. Then the woman said in verse 12, let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak one word unto my lord the king. And he said, say on. So she knew that if he got David to use the word, the Lord God, and to swear by his God that he would be locked in. He couldn't change his decision, so she has to get him to that point. Well, now that she's got him there, she takes her mask off. Now she can reveal what this play is all about. In verse 13, and the woman said, "Wherefore then hast thou thought such a thing against the people of God? For the king doth speak this thing as one which is faulty." You're at fault, David, she says. "And that the king doth not fetch home again his banished." David, this is you. What you have done to Absalom, you have banished your heir. And I think her words really started to show how the nation felt. The nation itself was being harmed by not having Absalom back home. Verse 14, I'll read from the net for verse 14. "Certainly we must die, and are like water spilled on the ground that cannot be gathered up again. But God does not take away life. Instead, he devises ways for the banished to be restored." What on earth is she saying? Well, she's saying Absalom is not dead. God would bring him back. How come you're not doing this, David? That's what she's saying to him. David, you should be bringing him back. Never mind the fact that Absalom should have died for what he did. Never mind the fact that Absalom has shown absolutely no remorse. David, bring him back. That's what the woman's saying. And David now correctly deduces, oh, I think I know the director of this play. This is Job. Job's behind this. But yet, David doesn't seem upset with Job or the woman. In fact, he really doesn't seem to show any surprise at how the events worked out or the decision that he was locked into making. First, look at verse 21. "And the king said," notice who he speaks to, "unto Job, Behold now, I have done this thing. Go therefore, bring the young man Absalom back. Bring him again. I've made a decision, and here it is. Go ahead, bring him back." So the play was a success. The son who always had the king's heart can now return from exile. Job's request was accomplished. Now, brother and sister, I want you to think about this for a second, and young people. Where have you seen this play before? Where do you think that Job got his idea for this play? Anybody have any thoughts where this play has been done before? Yes. Yeah.
Not the exact play, but Nathan had a good way of bringing about David's feelings last time.
Yeah.
Previous reading.
Right. So Nathan was able to elicit a response from him. Yes. Fantastic. Right answer. You know how come that's the right answer? Because that's the thing that Uncle Ian has on the screen next. So very good. That's a good answer. So the scene that Job and the woman set is exactly a play we've seen before. This is all about Cain and Abel. The woman and Job, they set the scene. They held it actually in the same place that Cain and Abel's story took place. It was in a field. In the Hebrew, it's Sadah, S-A-D-E-H. And that's exactly where the real story of Cain and Abel took place in Genesis chapter 4. Brothers and sisters, they're going to use the story of Cain and Abel to get Absalom back to Jerusalem. 2 sons, 2 brothers, striving in a field. One boy is killed by the other. A single heir is left. The widow's son, like Cain, fears for his life. The revengers of blood will seek his life. And so we put down on the one column there the story of Cain and Abel, and then we've shown the mirror image of the play with the 2 sons devised by Job and the woman. So we have in Cain and Abel 2 sons, 2 brothers striving in a field. Job and the woman, 2 sons, 2 brothers striving in a field. Abel is slain, leaving a single heir. To the woman, 1 son is slain, leaving a single heir. Cain fears he will be killed. The widow fears her heir will be killed. Genesis 4, verse 14, Cain laments he will be driven from the face of the earth. The widow fears she's going to have no name upon the face of the earth. If you look in your margin, for 2 Samuel 14, verse 7, that's exactly what it says. It says it's the face. Same words. Genesis 4, verse 15, Cain pleads for deliverance from vengeance. The woman pleads her son be delivered from revengers. And finally, God judges Cain will not be slain. David judges her son will not die. Remarkable, isn't it, to see how that they were able to draw that out. Now, there's a few twists and turns in the plot. However, God's judgment on Cain was righteous. He cursed him. He banished Cain on the face of the earth to wander as a fugitive and a vagabond. But in God's mercy, he placed a mark on his forehead that no man would take vengeance on Cain for what he did. And perhaps David saw through this story. If he did, he would have remembered how Eve, looking for the promised seed, got it wrong in thinking Cain was from the Lord, that he was the one. And David would need to learn that it's not Absalom. He is not the one, David, to ascend your throne. It's going to have to be Solomon. It's going to be whom God chooses to raise up a seed through Solomon. So David's going to have to learn the exact same lesson that, in a way, Eve learned. Well, we would also say if David saw the parallels, he would have seen the differences as well. Because unlike what Joab and the woman were painting, Absalom had pre-planned the murder of his brother Amnon. Under the law, as we've said, Exodus 21, verse 14, we read, "But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar that he may die." That's what should have happened to Absalom. That's Exodus 21 and verse 14. This is different than the case that they advanced of a heated argument in a field. That type of example would be dealt with by the slayer being able to flee to a city of refuge. And so we see in Numbers 35, verse 22, "But if he thrust him suddenly without enmity, or if cast upon him anything without laying of weight, or with any stone wherewith a man may die, seeing him not, and cast it upon him that he die, and was not his enemy, neither sought his harm, then the congregation shall judge between the slayer and the revenger of blood according to these judgments." Again, this is not the case of a brother suddenly getting angry in a field, in the heat of an argument, killing him. No, Absalom deserved to be banished. God had banished Cain and left him to wander in the earth. There was no remorse in this boy. And I think, brothers and sisters, we can actually see, I think that David did see this for what it was. Look what Cain says back in Genesis 4, verse 14. Keep your finger there. Keep your finger here in 2 Samuel 14. In Genesis chapter 4, and at verse 14, look what Cain says. "Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth." And if that's not bad enough, God, "and from thy face shall I be hid." Now look what David says to Joab. With your fingers, go back to 2 Samuel 14, verse 24. He says, "Go bring Absalom back from Geshur." Look what David says. "But let him not see my face." So Absalom returned to his own house, and as if for emphasis, we have it said again, "and saw not the king's face." Cain would not see the Lord's face anymore. David also saw, I think, in that symbolism, that Absalom would not see his face. And that's going to last for 2 more years. So in a total, David will not see his boy's face for 5 long years, even though he loved that boy. And so Joab's able to go get him and bring him back to the land. And so Absalom is able to return. And so the son returns. And so in 2 Samuel 14 and verse 25 and 26, Absalom comes back. And we read this: "But in all Israel There was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot even to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he polled his head, for it was at every year's end that he polled it, because his hair was heavy on him, therefore he polled it, or he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels after the king's weight. No wonder the nation loved him. They were in awe of his appearance. He was like perfect. There's no blemish in him. There was nobody as handsome in all of Israel, not even David. Even his hair was incredible. It weighed roughly 3 pounds. The net picks out the idea of 3 pounds. He cut it once a year. It would have been the talk of the town. How much does it weigh this year? Have you seen Absalom? What a man. He's so good looking. In the 2 Samuel 14, verse 27, we're also told that Absalom's children, he's going to have 3 boys and 1 girl. And the girl he actually names after his sister Tamar. And wouldn't you know it, she was of a fair countenance as well. The NIV says she became a very attractive woman. So everything that Absalom has, he's beautiful. No doubt his wife is beautiful. He's got this beautiful daughter who he calls Tamar. And Tamar is going to grow up, and she's going to marry Uriel. Tamar is going to marry Uriel. That's his daughter. And it's very interesting. And they're going to have a daughter, and she's going to, it gets a bit confusing, but she's actually going to name her daughter after her mother, the princess Maacah, after her grandmother. So Tamar's daughter Maacah grows up to be King Rehoboam's 3rd wife. This makes Tamar the grandmother of Rehoboam and Maacah's son Abijah, or King Abijah of Judah. We're not sure what happens to Absalom's boys, but we know they all die before Absalom does, because he has no heir to the throne. So all those boys died. And he has no heir of his own. Yet the spirit of rebellion that he starts is going to continue. And it's no coincidence that his granddaughter, Maacah, married King Rehoboam. And by the way, in the record, that was his favorite wife. That's 2 Chronicles 11, verse 21. That was his favorite wife. And it was this king who was responsible for splitting the nation. So what Absalom does is going to have unbelievable ramifications, not only for David's family, and eventually through his family, the kingdom gets split between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, between Judah and Israel, and it's going to come from that line. But Absalom has a mission. Even his patience has limits. And so in 2 Samuel 14, back in verse 28, and so Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem and saw not the king's face. Verse 29, therefore Absalom sent for Joab to have sent him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent again the 2nd time, he would not come. And so Joab, he might have been happy to have Absalom back, as more than likely Absalom is now, as David's oldest son, he's the logical heir to the throne. This would make Joab happy. So the throne looks like it's going to be able to continue. But you know what? I don't mind keeping that Absalom a little bit at arm's distance from us. He's a bit of a character. We'll just keep him over there. And David is now probably in a better state of mind. He's probably a little happier. His son whom he loves is back in the nation. The business of the kingdom is now moving forward. But here we're now going to see a clash of 2 very strong wills, because Joab is going to clash with Absalom. They have the same abutting farms, and this is going to be a problem. Job is so secure in his role as David's chief of defense that he ignores Absalom. I want to see my dad's face. He ignores him. Absalom asks again, I'd like to see my dad's face. I've been back in Jerusalem for 2 years. I want to see dad's face. He ignores him again. But Joab has never met a man like Absalom. He was also very secure. He knew that his dad David loved him. He knew he was number one in his dad's heart. And when he calls, you come. And it's very interesting what Absalom's going to do. You know, it is the only way, brothers and sisters, to even consider how Absalom had the utter nerve, the bold recklessness to have his servants burn Job's field. But that's exactly what he does. To finally get his attention, he says to his servants, go set Job's field on fire. Can you imagine setting Job's field on fire? Boy, Job is unbelievable. He's the head of their military. And you're going to burn his field? Well, yeah, because he's ignored me twice. I want to go see my dad. He's ignored me. So go burn his field. And so they go burn his field. Does that sound like a repentant man to you? He actually, by the way, doing that, he broke another law. Exodus 22 talks about you're not supposed to do that with another man's crops. And now he says, Job, do I have your attention? I just burned your field. Are you paying attention to me now? I want to go see the king. Give me an audience with the king. Otherwise, I should have stayed in Geshur. And you ever been so frustrated, brothers and sisters, that you've caught yourself saying something similar to what Absalom says? Look at verse 32. It had been good for me to have been there still. I can't see David. I might as well still be in Geshur. Or perhaps you've heard others in the truth say something similar when they're spiritually low. I had better friends before I came into the truth. My friends in the world never treated me like that. I was better off before I learned the truth. I might as well have remained there. Well, that was the state of Absalom's lack of spiritual thinking. And more incredible still, he's absolutely convinced he's an innocent man. Look at verse 32 of 2 Samuel 14. Now, therefore, let me see the king's face, and if there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. Really, Absalom? You really feel that? You should have been killed. But he thinks he's an innocent fellow. So Job mediates yet again. He asks David to meet with an unrepentant Absalom. Both Job and David are going to learn shortly how disastrous this reconciliation is going to turn out to be for the kingdom. It's a disaster. So 2 Samuel 14, verse 33. So Joab came to the king and told him. And when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. Well, typically in the scriptures, although it's not exclusively, but typically, the act of humility is shown by the person who's doing the kissing. Not here. David kisses Absalom. There's no humility or remorse in this boy. It's all backwards. Well, brothers and sisters, what can we take away from this second session? Well, first of all, contemplative reflection on the Word of God and its principles can prevent a rush to judgment. Absalom pressed David for a decision. He was unrelenting until David gave in and let his sons attend the banquet. The widow woman tried to rush David into making a major judgment, preventing him from the time he initially asked for to make a wise judgment. And we've seen the results of both of those decisions. In the truth, brothers and sisters, it's wise for us to think about something before we give an answer. The second thing I think we learn is that to avoid being fooled by outward appearances, we need to observe what a person does on a consistent basis. The Lord Jesus Christ says, by their fruits you shall know them. David and Israel were fooled by an unblemished man, the appearance of a perfect man. The external presence of Absalom was perfect from head to foot. And we're very susceptible as humans to that. We're often fooled by people's outward appearances in our children, sometimes even with our brothers and sisters, but especially with those that we encounter in the everyday circumstances of life. So we have to be careful that we don't get fooled by outward appearances. And I think the third thing we can take away, brothers and sisters, is that the demonstration of knowing God's principles is through their proper application, applied at the right time and in the right way. And that's how we show we understand God's principles, because we apply them in the right time and in the right way. Absalom's selfish confidence, his lack of remorse, was deserving of exile. David, not applying God's principles of judgment to a rebellious boy, gave ground to the rebellion that would soon follow. In our lives, brothers and sisters, we need to be students of the Word. We need to intimately know God's principles, and we need to know when and how to apply them, even in times when the circumstances happen to those who are closest to us. Absalom may have had the king's heart. He may even seem to have won Joab over, but what he really wants and what he really needs is the nation's. He wants the nation's heart. And how he goes about achieving that will be the subject of our third class this afternoon.